It's something which will be there forever. I will never let go.
Welcome to the podcast where we track down Australian war veterans, have a chat with them, and hear their stories. I'm Alex Lloyd, and this is Life on the Line.
They were building positions in there
if
for
anything
a
happened
fight.
to us, by the time anyone got to us,
I think it was chaos.
the weather was so bad there would be nobody left.
Boots full of blood.
And the next thing I hear was alarms,
Chances
screaming.
of survival were very, very slim.
The soldiers didn't want to go into the ambushes, so they'd send the kids in first. And so he was sent in first into an ambush and he got shot in the stomach.
It was very hard for me, very hard for my family.
And the plane burst.
Proud of the crew, proud of what I've achieved and what I'm doing.
Volunteer for service was in effect to put your life on the line.
Welcome to Life on the Line. Last Friday, I shared with you my conversation with German World War II veteran Eugen Pikura. If you missed it, I encourage you to also listen to that episode. This week's bonus conversation is with Jens Milbret, who served in the East German military in the Cold War. Welcome to Life on the Line. I'm Alex Lloyd, speaking on Skype today with Jens Milbret. Jens, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Hello.
So, Jens, where and when were you born?
I was born in 1962 in the north of East Germany, about a year after the Berlin Wall went up.
Do you have any military history in the family?
Not at all, nothing. It was compulsory to join the army in East Germany. That was my only connection.
How old were your parents during the Second World War?
My father was born in 29, so he was probably lucky not being a little bit older because he got sent as a 12-year-old to a camp to be educated as a SS officer. And fortunately, the head of that school was fair enough to when the Russians approached to send the boys all home, and he made it home 2 days before the Russians marched into his hometown.
Wow. So he's just managed to escape being part of that generation caught up in that very bloody conflict. And you're born in a fascinating era. The Cuban Missile Crisis has just occurred and tensions are at record highs. Do you have much memory growing up of being aware of this greater global geopolitical struggle, or were you just more focused on the immediate circumstances of day-to-day life?
Well, if you get born into such circumstances, you tend not to question it. You just take them as they are. I went to school and I always knew that there was a conflict on, especially end of the 60s, beginning of the 70s. The Vietnam War was going on and everybody was talking about. But the circumstances were different how I saw it. I've been exposed to the communist propaganda from my very first day on, so I did not really question anything. It was just a very one-sided opinion I had at that stage.
Which I'm sure will have grown and changed over the years, which we'll get to when we get to your military career. But staying in your childhood for a moment, what was your childhood like?
My mother, she was a writer. She was writing in an ancient North German language, which is sort of dying, unfortunately, now. And my father was a teacher, a school teacher. I had a brother 8 years older than me.
Would you describe it as a happy childhood?
Yes, I was very lucky. It was actually, I grew up in a small village, which was next to a big town, and this big town sort of grew and swallowed this little village. But when I was a child, it still had maintained this the character of being a village. So everybody knew everyone, and everybody stopped for a chat at the fence, and so that I have very happy memories about that. That was the private side, and then there was the other side, the school thing, and also being exposed to the propaganda at that stage. I didn't see it as that, but later on I realized what they had told us and how it affected my thinking about the whole world, basically. Took me a long time, and probably still takes me time, to get things straight in my head because I'm sort of questioning everything, if that makes any sense to you.
It does. Do you have an example of something, a fact of life or a perspective you might have been told back then that you look at now and go, hang on, I don't see it that way anymore?
Oh, very simple. I just mentioned the Vietnam War, and I recall that in my first grade already, so I was about 7 years old, the teacher came and told us we should all be solidary with the Vietnamese freedom fighters, and we should just donate some money for them. And of course, when you're 7 years old and somebody, figure of authority, asks you that, you're very happy to do that. I was instantly prepared to rake out all my savings, which were about $50 at that stage. And my parents, fortunately, prevented me from doing that. That was an early example from being told something and not questioning it. Later on, I learned what the background is of the war. And as I said, I'm still learning and I'm still discovering things. I'm still discovering lies I've been told. And I'm very interested in now in history because there's so much to discover and so much to learn. Unfortunately, a lot of things repeating right now, especially in Europe. So, yeah, I find it very interesting. But, of course, looking back, it was not a nice thing to be told all those lies.
History can be alarmingly cyclical at times. Looking, say, at the then recent history of World War II, your parents grew up and lived through it and saw it and experienced it firsthand by living through those years. How did the state frame that recent history, and did they ever clash with what you might have been told at home, or...
You mean how the East German government dealt with the history of the Third Reich? It was very easy, basically, to just point the finger at everyone else. So they made, after the war, they made a cut and said, okay, whoever is with us, we forget about your past. I mean, the whole of Germany was full of old Nazis and people with a history in that field. And the East Germans just, or the communists, not in general the East Germans, the communist regime, they just basically forgot about it. They had some small trials on just to make it look like. But in general, a lot of the old Nazis survived in East Germany and not bad.
Let's look ahead to your career in the military. When are you first exposed to wearing a uniform or anything like that?
I wouldn't call it a career. As I said, it was compulsory. Everybody had to go. Hardly anyone wanted to go because it was probably the least attractive army in the world. Yes, it's true. It didn't show any perspective, while an army in another country might give you a perspective, might give you education, might even give you some, just a job. This army didn't do any of it. They tried to tell everybody that for the sake of peace, we had to go there. And we all knew it was just propaganda again. And the army itself had a rather bad reputation within the people of the state, because you heard all these stories about people being rude or being physically abused in it. And so going there was already something nobody wanted to do. And the reputation of the army was very bad. But nevertheless, everybody got sort of mustered at the age of 16 and then sort of got told where they will end up, which part of the army, infantry or tanks or whatever. And with 18 it started. People, they were very active on the communist side. They got drafted earlier, and people that were critical about it, they got drafted later. People could get drafted until the age of 27, and of course a lot of young men had families and children already, so it was rather painful for them to go. If somebody expressed some critical opinion about it, he was just not as active supporting the communists how they would have liked, you were not, let's say, priority. So they then put those people at the end of the line just to punish them, knowing that when they get drafted later, it would hurt them. So it was just a punishment.
What about you? At what stage are you drafted?
So I was drafted at 19, but that has got another reason now. The Communist Party had basically infiltrated every aspect of life, every aspect. So, for example, if you wanted to go to university, you couldn't just go to the university and ask them. You had to go through several stages, and they were all dependent on the Communist Party. So they had to say yes or no, and then you probably would get a spot at the university. I decided I wanted to go to university after my service, but in order to get a spot at the university, one had to go a little longer. The 18 months was compulsory, so a year and a half. But if I would have done a year and a half, I would never gone to the university.
So by giving more to the party, they would give more back to you?
Yes, yeah. There was sort of a little bit of blackmailing. So if you don't do this, you don't go to university. So I did it. I went for 3 years altogether, which resulted then in me getting drafted at the age of 19.
By that stage, you're in your latter teens. Are you starting to form your own firmer political opinions, or are you still just accepting the status quo around you?
Well, to answer that, it probably takes a little longer because it was a very difficult situation in the whole communist part. People had two minds. There was a public mind, which sort of was in line with the party line. So whenever you were talking to people you didn't know, you didn't trust, you were just expressing opinions that were harmless or they were non-critical. And then there was the other way when you were with your own people and you were trusting them, you were probably critical of the regime and you would express opinions that were not on the party line. So of course, even with 18 or 19, one knew that something was not quite right. But as I said before, being born into that system, it was not so forefront questioning it. It was sometimes just, oh yeah, that's the way it is, or a bit naivety as well. It was probably very early start of forming my own opinion, and definitely not that far that I could say I had a critical mind there.
Well, you had no other frame of reference, no point of comparison. You have only grown up with this, and it sounds like you knew instinctively there's something not right here, but you don't know really what else it could be because you're completely isolated in this bubble. Yes,
that's true, but I have to say we were not completely isolated, which probably helped us forming an opinion, because living in East Germany, we were on one hand exposed to West German media at all fronts: radio, television, not so much papers are not allowed, but they couldn't stop radio waves or television waves. So we got a bit of a picture of both sides. But again, it was not so much questioning the whole status quo. It was basically just putting up with what was there and trying to navigate any problems, because it was the society was flooded with spies from the secret police. So in public, you could never be sure who's listening and who is probably carrying what you're saying to another place. It was almost a schizophrenic being there.
That's fascinating, though, that you got to have those glimpses of life on the other side. Like you say, even the Communist Party can't stop radio waves and television broadcasts getting across. What about your parents? Because they would obviously remember quite a different life. I'm thinking pre-war, so they've seen a range of different ways of living. Do they talk about ever with you much what life used to be like or differences, or do they just accept this is what life is like now?
questions were just simply not answered, or they were sort of dodged because they couldn't answer it the way what it really was, reality, because that would have been too dangerous then. So yes, of course, sometimes it was coming out and they were talking about old days, but on the other hand, I think when the war came up, nobody believed that it really would stay for a long time. And so that's why they were probably just waiting for it to be over and waiting and waiting and waiting. That's what I think.
Let's jump back to you being drafted. Tell me about your first few months in the military and what that was like.
Yeah, we got drafted in end of October or beginning of November, and got drafted into the Marines in North Germany. That was 1981.
Anyone listening who might think of US Marines, very different. You were, of course, in the Volksmarine, which was the People's Navy. So that's basically the equivalent of the East German Navy.
Yes. And some might recall 1981 was the year when in Poland there was the Solidarność movement coming up. And there was a lot of tension. It was a similar situation what we had 1968 in Prague, where the East German Army also was put on alert. So we got drafted, and even we were young recruits. We had a lot of alarms in our initial education. Standing for our outside, and everybody thought, it's going towards Poland now, but fortunately none of that has happened. So it was a exciting time, and of course we've been told that some, I don't know what the English word is, contra-revolutions.
Counter-revolutionaries?
Were going on in Poland, and we are here to protect them, and propaganda, lots of propaganda.
Tell me a bit more about the day-to-day routine, ignoring disruptions from alarms and standing to. What was it like?
It was, I went into a big unit, as I said, north of Germany, right by the water, about 2,000 recruits. And so it was a big factory as such. We had the normals 6 o'clock in the morning till 10 o'clock at night, with all the disciplinary things you can imagine from an army. The East German Army, even it sort of pronounced itself as an army of new type. It was very conservative. It was very orientating itself on the history of the Wehrmacht. So even the uniforms were very, very close to that. And it was really, first you do what's said, and then you might complain. So discipline was probably the biggest issue.
Did you adjust okay, or did you have those discipline issues yourself?
No. I mean, yes. I mean, everybody had, let's say, small hiccups adjusting to this. That was pretty normal. But in general, it was so big and it was so strict that everybody kept their head in and just tried to get through it. There was definitely not a place to become a hero or such. It was pretty harsh. The initial education was 8 weeks, and then we got special training, but that was not something we could elect. We just been told. I was elected to become a driver. So I had another 3 months of training on driving trucks. It was in the middle of winter, so it was icy, and they had their own driving tracks, off-road tracks. Everything was in ice and snow. So that was pretty harsh. We sometimes spent 4 or 5 hours on the back of a truck without any heating or anything, just being driven around. After that, when the first half year was over, we basically got sent into the units we were supposed to serve our time. So the initial training was the basic training, and then then the special training, and then we got sent off to where we should serve the rest of the time.
Where's that for you?
It was in my hometown, which was a very unusual occasion. It was very unusual because it was a policy of the regime to basically send people very far away from home. I can't really tell what the reason for that was, if it was character building or they just wanted to avoid any more disciplinary problems by, getting people far away from their friends. So I have no idea.
Makes the army the only support base you have, the only point of familiarity, whereas you have a bit of confidence and set foundation in your hometown. So it does sound unusual for a regime like that to send you there, and also quite lucky for you.
Yeah, well, I was not so lucky as such because I lasted there just about 3 months. What happened after this initial training is I was first sent to Rostock, which was the headquarters of the East German Marine, and I became a driver of a captain. I had an East German car. It was just basically picking them up at home in the morning and then driving home after office, and that was. As you can imagine, a rather boring job. East Germany tried to be an independent army. Of course, it was just a satellite of Russia. So whatever happened in the East German army was signed by the Russians. They didn't make any rules and laws without asking the Russians. So there was one thing also, there was an education place to educate officers. That was in Dresden, which is the south of East Germany. It was called the Military Academy. And while very, very good officers were sent to Moscow to study, the Moscow Academy couldn't cope with all these students. They established this East German Military Academy in Dresden, and each academy, this academy had sections. So there were, let's say, the Marines was one section, the border army was a section, the Luftwaffe or the air was one section, and so on. There were, I think, 8 sections, and each section had a boss, a chief, which was usually a general or an admiral. And they all needed drivers. And the chief of the Marine section, he was a little bit, he didn't like South German boys, and he always got, when his driver was going home and he was about to get a new one, he always tried to get somebody from the north. I think it's just the language he didn't like, or I'm not sure. Anyway, that was the reason why I got sent down to Dresden. So I was running around Dresden in my Marine uniform, and there was no Marine at all. There was not even water except the river. And I became a little bit of an exotic person there because I basically could wear whatever I wanted. Even my sergeant and nobody knew what I was supposed to wear. As long as it was blue and white, I could wear anything. When I went after hours and I went out, I made instantly contact with people because they were so keen on where I came from and what I've done and why I'm there. And so that was a rather a nice part. But as human brain works, you just keep the nice parts in mind and forget about the bad things.
Well, Dresden is a lovely place to distract your mind with.
Yes, yeah. And I was driving this admiral around, and again, a rather boring job. Unfortunately, there was no other option to do things there, and I just lasted 2.5 years until I got released. It was a long time, very long time.
So you're 2.5 years of driving this Admiral round, and it might not have been the most exciting role, but it sounds like you would have been mostly kept out of harm's way, which is fortunate for you. But being around such a high-profile person, you would have come across some interesting situations and seen some stuff, I'm sure.
Yes, I was. On one hand, I was fortunate because while other guys were training in their tanks every day and really robbing around the mud, I was in a very fortunate position. I had what we call a good job. It was sometimes already too good because we took ourselves some, when I say we, me and my colleagues, we took some liberties nobody would have expected are available in the army. We made it easy, but in the end it was certain things couldn't be changed. And I mentioned that before, that even the East German army was ruled by the Russians. So we had certain regulations in place. They made it pretty hard for us. For example, the Russians ordered the East German army to be ready for battle at any time, which meant that at any time at least 80% of the personnel had to be in the barracks. So while we saw or we knew that the whole of the Bundeswehr, which was our immediate enemy, we've been told, was sort of going home on Friday night, and there were just a couple of people left in each barrack, we had to stay in the barracks. And of course, you can imagine the bosses are not there. You have groups or companies, we call it, I think it's platoons is the word, of 50, 60 people, young boys in their early 20s, late teens, early 20s. It results in a lot of conflict and disciplinary actions. I think the biggest problems the whole army had was alcohol. People started to drink because there was just nothing else to do. Some people just left. They just went out and then they got caught somewhere being drunk and got incarcerated then. Worst scenario is that you got sent to an army. The army had its own justice system, its own prison, and that was very, very feared of. There were just rumors going around about that, and nobody wanted to try that or prove those rumors. That was very the devil on the wall. So it was a difficult time. Even we did manage to find some a little bit freedom there.
Tell me about some of the standout memories that you have.
Well, as I said, the human nature tends to forget all the bad things and keep the good things. It is difficult to describe. You asked me in the beginning about developing a conscience about the whole situation in the Eastern Bloc. And I told you that when I went to the army, it was nothing was really questioned. It was sort of thought about it, but nothing really substantial. Being in the army for this rather long period of time probably started that process. Even while in the army, one was rather solid behind the system. We were exposed to propaganda every day, and I don't know if you know about, in Dresden itself, you couldn't get any Western radio or television. Dresden sits in a valley. You couldn't get anything. So anyway, it was sort of the time afterwards, when back in the normal society, when the doubts came up and when the thoughts came up. Because when you're in the army, everything is black and white, basically. You follow orders and you don't ask questions. That's how we were brought up, or that's how we were told that. When you suddenly, in reality again, you compare, first of all, and you start asking questions. And that's when it started. I mean, from my personal experience, I just tell you, I was released in 1984, and as I said, at that stage, I did not question that system. In 1987, so just 3 years later, I had decided to leave that country already, which is not a small decision. It basically outed you from any public life. You closely observed by secret police, and if you went to the ministry and you handed in your application for leaving the country, you instantly became a no person. So that is just those 3 years. It was not even 3 years of time after being released from the army had changed my thinking 180 degrees. And I was not the only one, because I actually, when I got out, it was 89, just a few months before the wall came down. So a lot of other people had done the same. As you might recall, in 89 there was a big refugee wave via Hungary and via the Czech capital. So this questioning of the status quo, that was a very broad thing.
No, that's fascinating to hear about that mindset change over time. When you left the country, did you leave your parents back behind, or did they come out with you?
Well, that was probably the hardest part. I have to say that my brother got out about 6 years before me. He was part of a wave who left the country officially because the East German government was broke and they needed some money, and they got some money from the West, but one condition was that they let out a certain number of people, and my brother and his family was amongst them. So I had my brother in the West already, and he went out in 1983 while I was still in the army. The first result was, of course, that was all relayed by the secret police. The first result was I was not allowed to drive my Admiral anymore, because I could have developed a relationship with him, a relationship of trust, and that was not wanted. So I became a so-called taxi driver, which meant that any officer of this academy who needed to do a business trip somewhere or go to the ministry to Berlin or anything could book a car, and I was driving that car then, which resulted in a lot of insight on what was going on about the corruption and about the privileges those people had. Anyway, that was the first. The second result of my brother leaving was I had no chance to go to university anymore. It was sort of the whole family got punished that one person left. So I had no illusions. I couldn't go to university, which again probably was a big, some sort of seed for doubt, which resulted in me leaving that country. My brother, I recall that he lived in Berlin, where all the ministries were, where the communists were very strong, and he worked for a communist publishing company, and he was pretty strong in that field. And the same thing happened to him. He saw what happened there, and he completely changed his mind. He went completely the other way, which then resulted in him applying for getting out. But that is something he could not tell me while I was in the army, while I was there. He never spoke to me about it. And then he was gone. And I saw him just 5 years later. So the decision to, coming back to the question regarding my parents, of course, got in trouble because my brother went. My father was, if you want to call it, lucky that he kept his job as a teacher, because as a teacher he was supposed to be teaching the kids the communist way, and he always refused that. He sort of navigated his way through without doing that. And one day I got all my mic together and asked him, look, I really don't want to be here, because there was no indication that the wall would come down anytime soon. And I asked my father, and to my surprise, he said, look, if you want to do it now when you're young. And that was it. So I handed in my application, knowing that I probably won't see my parents for the next 20 years. That was sort of 20 years you were not allowed to re-enter the country. I didn't know that, a few years later the wall would come down. But it was a long decision, a very hard decision.
It sounds it, and it sounds that's an incredible journey that you've gone through, that you, as you've gotten older, are starting to see things aren't quite right, and you're getting more and more of a sense of that. You're seeing your brother's own disenchantment with the state and him leaving, and how that has even more repercussion on you, and you make the hard but brave choice, no, I need to get out of here. But as you say, fortunately, it wasn't 20 years. You could go back home a lot sooner.
Yeah, I escaped actually. I managed to go on a holiday to Hungary, and my brother went down there as well. So I met him in Hungary, and he put me in the back of a station wagon and drove me across the border to Austria. That's how I escaped. That was about 6 months before the wall actually came down. And I tell you, if I would have known, I wouldn't have done it. I lost all my possessions, and I risked a long time in jail.
So you said then you escaped. So did you hand in the application to leave and it was rejected?
Yes, it was several times rejected, which was the normal policy. If it would have been not rejected in the beginning, many more people would have done it. But it was policy to reject it over and over again, so that people might get discouraged in the end or just give up on it.
So you get to reunite with your parents, but you still decide to leave Germany and you move to Australia?
First of all, I went to Hamburg, where my brother lived, and then, of course, the wall came down. I was not so happy in Germany, let's put it that way. I wanted to get out. And, on the other hand, I was locked away until I was 27. So I was 27 when I actually came out of East Germany, and I wanted to see the world. I wanted to do things, and I wanted to go somewhere. And the last thing I wanted was settling down and starting a family or anything. So I waited quite a few years, and then I worked in theater, made some friends in England. I lived in England for a while. And then, I was just traveling around Europe with theater productions, and somehow got to know somebody who was going to Australia, and I decided to have a long holiday there, and got stranded here. I got initially trained as a electrician in East Germany. You see, in East Germany, you couldn't just train whatever you wanted. You got given a choice of 2 or 3 jobs. They were at that stage required in the economy. So it was not that, I want to be this and this. You were given a paper and you had to tick a box of, let's say, which you liked most. Even if you didn't like anything of it, you had to pick some of it. I got trained as a crane electrician. When I handed in my application for leaving the country, I quit my job. That was common in order to emphasize on it, to give it a bit more weight. Because if the reason why they didn't let people out was that they needed workforce. And if I would have stayed on working, there would have been no reason for them to grant my application to let me go out. So I stopped my job and I became a freelance photographer at small theaters and that. And then when I escaped and I was in West Germany, of course I wanted to work in my old job. But then I realized that the technical development had gone much further. So while in East Germany the technology was still 60s maybe, 50s, 60s, 60s mostly, when I went to the port in Hamburg, that was all brand new microelectronic computer control, and I was not educated in that way, not at all. I had no clue. So for me, it was a very difficult time because I did not know what to do. And fortunately, I had a friend who helped me getting a job as an electrician in theater. And that's when I started, since I worked as a theater photographer before. But then I started to look at the lighting side, and I then educated myself further and further. I went to school and became a lighting master later on. And from then on, that was my my profession. So the actual being an electrician, I have never pursued that in any way.
But now you're happily settled in Australia with a family, and you've been living here for quite some time. When were you last back home?
Oh, I came back about a week ago. But not Germany. I have no bonds to Germany anymore, unfortunately. But my wife, she's Austrian, and she's got her mother still in Salzburg. So we're going quite a bit looking after her. Also, the business we're running a fashion business in Castlemaine. We're going overseas to buy our stock in Italy a lot. So I'm quite a bit in Europe, but not so much in Germany. Yeah, in East Germany, you see, this all might sound very interesting, but in the end, it's really nothing of that where I grew up and how I live is existing anymore. My school is not there anymore. My sports clubs are not there anymore. My favorite pubs are not there. Nothing is existing anymore. So for me, there's not much of a point of going there. I had a couple of friends. Unfortunately, they are not there anymore. I'm very happy that East Germany as such has developed quite a bit, and it's a beautiful part of the world now, but it's just not mine anymore. So I don't need to go. I have adopted the south of Germany and Salzburg in Austria as my new home, and quite happy there.
It's become quite a disconnected, separate part of your life when you don't have those connections to those roots anymore. It doesn't really shape what you're currently doing today. Does it enter your thoughts often today, your earlier life and your time in the military?
The military time, even it is more than 30 years ago, it was, I think, a very character-shaping time. Not that I asked for it, but I think it was. I mean, if you're 18 or 19 years old and you get thrown into this pool and where you suddenly have to swim, it is, you experience a lot of ups and downs and very emotional moments, so that it burns itself into your brain. And I have to say, in quite regular intervals, I'm still dreaming of it, not in a negative way, but I'm dreaming of it. It means that it still occupies a part of my thinking. When I'm conscious, when I'm not asleep and not dreaming, and I read something about that time or just recall, it fills me with sort of anger how these people lied to me and how they told me things that were absolutely wrong. So hard to explain. It feels like losing. I have lost quite a few years with that. So yeah, it's something which will be there forever. I will never let go. But it's not that bad either.
Well, Jens, I found it to be a fascinating conversation. Thank you for your time today.
Not a problem.
If you liked the episode, please be sure to subscribe to us in your podcast app of choice. You can find us in Apple Podcasts, TuneIn, and Overcast. You can also go to our website and subscribe to our email newsletter, www.lifeonthelinepodcast.com. Also look up LOTL Pod on Twitter and Life on the Line Podcast on Facebook and Instagram. Join us next Tuesday for a conversation with an Australian servicewoman interviewed by Sharon Maskell-Dare. And come back next Friday for my conversation with another German World War II veteran. Life on the Line is brought to you by Thistle Productions. Artwork by Big Cat Design, music by Dan Van Werkhoven. Thanks for listening, and lest we forget.